This is the PR Podcast, a show about how public relations helps you tell your story to the world. We talk with great PR practitioners who have the skills, creativity, and just plain savvy to get their clients noticed. Now here's your host, Jody Fisher.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the PR Podcast. I'm Jody Fisher. Thanks for joining us. Well, we had not one, but two episodes last week. Our regularly scheduled episode featured the terrifically talented Tamara Sykes with Postali PR. She talked about how she gets, and I love this word, visibility for her clients rather than publicity for her clients. I thought that was a great perspective and a great way to describe what we really strive for as PR people. And then we had about midweek, we had a special episode drop on war zone reporting. And I thought it was important to do that in the context of what's going on in Ukraine. And I turned to my friend Stephanie Gaskell, who is a former reporter for the Associated Press and more. She's worked and done war zone reporting in Iraq and Afghanistan, and thought that was a really terrific episode, if I do say so. I thought her participation was terrific. You know me, like, what am I? I'm just your humble little host. But hope you got a chance to listen to both of those episodes. Let us know what you think on our social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Please drop us a note. Tell us if you loved it. Tell us if you hate it. Tell us what you want to hear in the future. You know, that's what we're here, is to bring you the content that you're interested in, so we can help share tips and tools and make this whole PR thing that we do just a little bit better. We also want you to be a guest on the PR Podcast if you are so inclined. Send us a DM on Twitter as well at the PR Podcast. Tell us why you want to be a guest, and we'll sign you up for a future episode. Now, let's get on to our guest, who we also met through Twitter. Let's get right into it. Amanda Leek is the creator of Press Pounce PR, insightful, reputed, delightful little line in the jungle of public relations and news, where she and her colleagues work to tailor and personalize PR and public content with a human touch wherever it's most important and relevant for the stories that make your business. Amanda helps build reputation, relationships, and public coverage on behalf of clients using journalistic experience. She is a former journalist herself, just like me, as well as connections and storytelling. Her work's been featured in publications including the Telegraph, the Guardian, the NZ Herald, that's in New Zealand, for those of you who didn't know, plus niche media and audiences. She always has a good question, a content prompt, or a terrible joke. Now, we're going to have to go head to head because I am the king of dad jokes. So let's see what she's got. Amanda, welcome to the PR Podcast.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. And
thanks for joining us all the way from the UK, right? You're taping, where are you, in London?
Yeah, well, outside London, nearer to Reading and Oxford and that kind of place. I am from London, and I also lived in New Zealand for a while, so that explains my New Zealand Herald experience. So thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Tell us about your work and your work with Press Pounce PR. This is your creation?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So I've been a journalist for a while, and then it's then obviously the face of journalism changed, and then I moved over into content marketing, and they both overlapped, and then blogging and podcasts, and it's almost sometimes it's indistinguishable between journalism and content, and more so. But the actual what's the word? Legit PR job, I guess, came in 2020 when I was part of this business membership group, and I was just doing content, and obviously lots of businesses were coming to me and people like me because the pandemic happened. Remember that? And
that little thing that showed up a couple of years ago, right?
I know, it's weird to think that it's been, over 2 years, kind of, just 2 years, I guess. So shortly after the pandemic happened, I joined a lot of online memberships. I had been in already, and lots of businesses were panicking because they hadn't paid as much attention to online stuff, and now that was the only thing. So it was a very interesting time, and I was approached by people thinking, okay, well, now that we can all focus completely online, we should look at PR and getting coverage on PR. And so someone threw out a question. There was an axe throwing venue that was opening in a town in the UK, well, in Liverpool, and they had other venues elsewhere. And axe throwing, I don't know how big it is where you are, but when I started researching, it's kind of come from the US and quite exciting over there. But virtually unheard of here, or at least it's starting to come here. And so a venue was opening up, and they were just like, well, you know, we want to be in the local press. We've not done it before. And I said, okay, well, I'll see what I can do. But me being a journalist, I just kind of wrote it as a journalist would, wrote the press release, researched, you know, where Axeling came from, researched the big celebrities like Jason Momoa, who made it quite big and everyone. Yeah, so then I kind of sent that off to different places and kind of worked on their behalf. And it was kind of a first little trial to see whether I could do PR, because I guess I have been doing PR my whole life, or I've been doing journalism from the other side and knowing exactly what works and what doesn't work when a PR or a press release lands on my desk. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to write for the journalist I was and know what pisses them off and know what they actually makes life easier for them. I mean, a PR's job is to make a journalist's life, well, job easier. But a journalist's job is to make the editor's life easier and so on. So yeah, so I did, you know, everything that I would love as a journalist. And yes, it got covered by lots of different local press and a few other places. And from that one thing that I didn't quite realize I knew PR, but obviously I did. Then lots of businesses came to me since then, and it grew and grew. And now I'm doing more PR projects. I guess my content idea when the pandemic happened was to make a membership, and I have that. So I kind of help people with regular content in my membership. But now my big clients, my big projects are PR. So I guess that's where it started. And I could tell you all the things that happened since then, but what do you want to know?
Well, let's talk about that perspective that you just talked about. You and I have a similar background. I was a journalist. I never call myself a journalist. I was a reporter. There are journalists who are, you know, really good at their jobs. I was a beat reporter. I just went out in the street with my microphone and my tape recorder and phoned my reports back into the radio station. But nevertheless, bringing that perspective of having been in those reporter shoes, understanding what goes into creating that reporter or that media journalism product is a great advantage, I find, even, you know, 20 years down the road from having been a reporter, and you maybe not so long. And I love the phrase that you used. The PR person's job is to make the reporter's life easier, and the reporter's job is to make the editor's life easier. It kind of, you know, there's like a little ladder there, right? And I've described that to people in a similar way, that, you know, I have just as much interest in helping a reporter as I do helping my client, because if I help the reporter is going to be inclined to write the story the way I'd like to see it come out. I don't want to say that they're going to write the story I want, because that would say that I'm writing their story. I would never be so presumptuous. But get more from you on your perspective on helping the reporter create their finished product. What do you deliver to them, or how do you engage with your client to deliver to the reporter the stuff that they need to write the story you want them to?
Well, your previous episode, which I listened to this week with Tamara, that was an amazing episode, by the way. And yeah, I mean, even just the tiny little things that I guess I realized I was doing. But you gave one example where you kind of do B-roll and you do video and you do all these things, the little multimedia bits and pieces that can go in a folder, go in a Google Drive, and then that makes one story that could just be words into a video story, into an audio story. And I do a version of that. So often when it doesn't appear up front to be needed, I will interview someone face to face on video like this anyway. I started, you know, being a PR during the pandemic. So actually, the idea of doing it not during a pandemic is a bit new to me now. So actually, meeting journalists as a full blown PR professional is going to be interesting. Just say like, oh yeah, people exist in real life now. But the advantage of that is that I could only do stuff remotely and online. So I could only get, even just talking to you now, that is content already just made, whereas that was the only choice I had. Whereas like when you bump into someone at a networking meeting, it's then you have to figure out how to make content like afterwards. Oh, let's set up something. But now just naturally talking to someone or naturally commenting in a Facebook thread becomes content as a screenshot, you know. So all these little bits and pieces can be put into a folder, and the real thing is to get all the details of screenshots of conversations and messages, audio clips of from the video as well. And so that in that way, a journalist can then fish through everything in a folder, and if they can just pick and choose the best bits for their editorial and for their agendas, and to make stories in different ways for them. So one way I would just naturally interview someone and talk about them and the story behind them. And that goes back to my early days and my first journalism jobs, which was I was an intern at the New Zealand Herald, and it was a series, a supplement called The Aucklander, and Auckland is, you know, a big city in New Zealand. So the main focus of that was to find one person, and the story is about one person and the emotions and the drive and the context all around it. But in several meetings of my first ever, you know, internship was me hearing journalists, you know, pitch a story to the editor, and the editor, the first question would be, where's the Aucklander, where's the person? And so I guess that's just drummed into me. So I will interview a business owner now, regardless of the story, regardless of whether they think it's just pure news or whether it's about, I don't know, a product, but find them, and then I can then pick and choose their quotes, their emotions, their drives, and I'm asking all those questions, even though for them it might not appear to be necessary for the story, but those little emotional quotes or off the cuff comments or all these things that we talk about just naturally are used and are often led with when a journalist uses them.
Yeah, let's put your journalism hat on for a moment there. Are there pieces of content or ways that stories get pitched that used to capture your attention? You know what I mean? I understand that every reporter has their beat. They have their stuff that they like to write about or that they're assigned to write about. But was there ever a category of, you know, a piece of information or a piece of video or audio or whatever it was, or maybe it's the way a story was framed, that caught your attention? I mean, how should PR people be approaching reporters with their pitches, understanding that reporters probably get 200 of them a day?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a good question, and obviously that's like the secret sauce, isn't it? Well, the interesting thing when I've had a beat as a journalist or a theme. So, you know, my story has got like I did my NCTJ course, and it was also the first course that ever did video journalism, and they were a little bit behind because obviously that was happening already. And then I went into local news, and that was a completely different kettle of fish from then going on to finance reporting and tech reporting and a little bit of arts reporting like theatre and film. And all these things are completely varied in their themes, but then I guess the story is about the person, or it is about this one thing that will then apply. Like you've got to the journalist, I always looked for like the universal theme. So I mean, there's a lot of talk now about, you know, the I won't go into it, but like obviously the Ukraine and Russia, and a lot about how seeing people on the ground is actually giving people hope and showing how people are helping each other. And so the universal theme for that would be hope, whereas like the universal theme for the horrors, well, it's horror, right? and it's completely like what you choose to focus on actually says more about the value and the theme that you're looking for. Well,
that's really interesting that you have to pick beyond just the thing that you're talking about, you know, the widget that you're trying to sell, is actually picking a theme to hang the story around.
Yeah, and I guess with business owners, they're probably familiar working out their values or their mission statement, and that's a similar thing. So I mean, if a business value could be kindness, so then you're trying to hang everything on that, like you said, hang everything on that theme of kindness. So even if they are just launching, I don't know, a book, you've got to actually tell all the stories that go into it that hang around that theme, and then the journalist can probably spot several stories out of that.
That's a really interesting. I find that to be a really interesting approach, fascinating, and a fascinating observation, because I've always said, and a lot of people have said it's not an original idea, all stories are about people, right? All stories, no matter what it's about a person. And you pick up any newspaper story, I guarantee you in the first 2 sentences, there's going to be a person's name in it, right? So journalists hang stories around an individual and tell the story through that individual and that individual's experience and what they have to say or what they've done or whatever that is. And you were saying, what I'm hearing is that you take that even a step further and you bake the emotion, you bake the theme, you bake the reaction of that person into that pitch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And we all know as well, when we're writing a press release, it's a best practice is to kind of, when you're talking to the client, you're trying to bring this out with them. But once you're already writing and you've got all your materials in front of you, you want to put the most emotional or the most striking quote at the top, and the most, striking thing about the story at the top. And often that's either a surprising thing, which I'll say in a minute, or just, pure emotion. So it's, and so with business PR, people can, I've seen so many press releases that are dry, but and boring, and they're therefore hard to write a story about as a journalist. But the reason they're dry and boring is because it's just like the same language and the same like rhythm, and it's more like, okay, well, we have a history of this company doing this, and here we go, and there's a quote, the owner's really proud. And proud is like, a nice emotion, and if you could make the whole story about like why that person is proud in the first place, then that will become a real story. And the other thing is surprise, or I guess unusual. And this is what goes back to your introduction. You said I often have terrible jokes to tell. But the reason that
Come on, we're gonna get there, so go for it.
Well, the reason why jokes are interesting is it's the surprise, isn't it, and the absurd. And when you get to that, it's combining two themes and then coming up with something a bit unexpected. So that is a classic good PR trick. So as a journalist, because I've covered several different topics, like I've worked in finance and I've worked in the arts, and I've covered, I don't know, the first woman to do this within a man's world, like finance. And so how I found that story of like I found a story of the first woman of Wall Street, and therefore how that relates now to like investors now, and they're actually using her style without realizing, because it's been attributed to men and everything like that. And there's so many stories like that, and you uncover it and the history has been rewritten a little bit. And so just uncovering that, like, oh, okay, that was a surprise that I didn't expect.
Delivering new information. I mean, the core, right? The word is news, right? What's new? What's new about it? And I do think that, as we're doing our jobs as PR people every day, we run the risk of, let's put it that way, you're churning out all this stuff, you're working through with all your clients, you run the risk of forgetting that key idea, which is deliver what is new about this. And it's not just, oh, we, wrote a check to a, nonprofit organization, we gave money to a donation, or we built a new building, or it's sort of like, well, why is that important? What's the new in there? And going back to what you said about the emotional aspect of it, what brings the emotional new out of it, or why is the new making the some kind of a unique emotion? I find that a fascinating concept, and I think it's something that we all run the risk of forgetting.
Absolutely. Well, you sort of you gestured to me just now to tell you a joke. So shall I do that?
Go for it.
Well, my other half told this to me the other day, so I'll use this one. I'll make him famous. Okay, so I used dog shampoo instead of normal shampoo the other day, and now I feel like a really good boy.
Oh my gosh. Okay, that's really
Is that
bad.
bad?
That's like a dad joke. That's something I would tell to my kids.
I love dad jokes.
Oh, that's brilliant. All right, I'm using that tonight when I go home
Good, right?
to my 12-year. Well, my 12-year-old will just walk away from me. My 9-year-old will roll her eyes and just be like, "Dad," and she'll give me one of those.
Yeah,
Oh,
but
that's
I
funny.
love it.
Now
Love
you
it.
work on the international stage. I mean, you're based in the UK,
Mhm.
and you're telling stories there, obviously, domestically in the UK. But you've also worked in New Zealand. Are you pitching stories internationally as well?
I do, and as a well, actually, that my current client is probably the best example of this. But some other ways that I've previously done. I mean, I guess this goes back to it's more like I don't because I read that you were going to phrase your question that how do you modify it for the international market, and I just found that quite interesting because I don't start with something and then modify it. It's almost like the local context doesn't really exist, because if we're talking about what we talked about just now, like a theme, and if we talk about, I don't know, hope, then that's going to be universal. And that's then once you start at that big, macro level and look for how one particular story can hinge on something that everyone across the world can relate to, then you can start to look at the local specifics and all the specifics of the story and the person and the person's background and upbringing and how that factors into it. And you discovered me on Twitter because a tweet I put out got picked up
I
by.
want to get it. It's a perfect segue. So let's talk about this, right? So this tweet thread I thought was brilliant, and you wrote this. I'm looking at it right now, November 22, 2021, and it starts out: got a story? Want to start PR? Here's how I build a list of media people or influencers most likely to be interested. I do this with my clients every time. Thread. And do you want to walk us through this, or maybe I'll introduce each tweet and then you can give me the reaction, right? So step one, you said it was define the story. Go ahead.
Yeah, so this was related to exactly what you were talking about, because my first question might be different to someone else's first question, which is more like, why are you doing this now? And that's the newsy, timely piece. But also, like, why is it important now? And once you start asking that, or you can ask that in different ways, and important in what sense? So whether it's an emotional sense, so it really impacts one person or one kid's life, or it could be a moral reason. And so then that opens it up to debate and everything else. But then that starts the interesting conversation from the start, rather than, okay, like, what's the context to start with? I kind of start from the top and be like, okay, why is this important in the first place? Why do you think it's important? And then I'll be asking, why do different sectors of audiences think it's important? And then why
So
now?
you get to step two, then you define as location, which seems kind of obvious, but go ahead. Step two, location.
Yeah, so I guess exactly how you just asked me, I think of that second. So I think, is there a story in the first place? Obviously. And then once I have a theme or a moral behind it, then the rest just falls into place, and the rest is more just fitting in. It's kind of like getting the outside of a jigsaw puzzle. And then once I know that there's a puzzle there, and it's about hope, or it's about, like, I don't know, yeah, a kid's life or whatever, then the rest, you're filling the rest in.
Step three, you say, are keywords, and this is the part I found fascinating. Tell us about keywords. What do you do?
Yeah, so I mean, this comes from my content marketing jobs and training, and coming from journalism into content, and as an employee, we're using SEO tools. And I was just thinking, okay, this seems so technical and complicated to a marketer just learning it. But for me, I was just like, well, actually, the SEO questions and the questions that come up at the top, like Google snippets, and like if you enter a keyword into the SEO tools, it comes up with, there's a reason why the top results are questions or the headlines are questions, because that's how journalists would see it, and they would only write about what's important. And so the keywords that come to the top, the SEO tools that you can use for keywords, kind of just hinge on what would you ask about to get to this story. Don't know if I'm explaining that brilliantly, but I would use SEO tools for that reason, but kind of more thinking, okay, a journalist is asking these questions that are then coming up. Answer the Public is a great website, and you can put in a keyword or a topic or a business, and you get a range of all the questions that people are asking that results are coming up on Google. But the reason that's important is also Answer the Public makes it pretty easy to see the 6 W's, which journalists use all the time to even assess if there's a story to start with. But the how, why, where, the Answer the Public actually gives it all in a circle of all the different questions that that people are directly asking that are then popular hits. And so yeah.
Now step four you mentioned is a wide search, and then step 5 is search journal request and others. So tell us what those mean.
So I start wide, or start general. So I just go to Google News and then see what the most recent things are on that topic or on that question. And then I would definitely filter maybe for the last like 3 or 6 months. And then I have already a list of articles and bylines, and therefore journalists who I can approach, who I know cover this topic, and the chances are they'd like to cover it again, but from a different angle. And then I would go more specific. So based on the topic, there's a few different ways to do this, but obviously Twitter is how you discovered me, and Twitter is amazing. And Twitter is what journalists use. It's where they live, and it has been since Twitter existed. And so yeah, I mean, I was listening to previous episodes on this podcast, and I was astonished that some PRs might not even be on Twitter. I mean, they are missing where the journalists live.
All right, and then coming to the end of your list, step 6, you say look for extra audiences, and step 7, collabs and overlapping audiences. So what do you do there?
So extra audiences is quite interesting, and sort of what I was trying to get at when I talked about the surprise and combining 2 topics, because if I was thinking of, okay, what's popular now, and popular doesn't necessarily mean good or bad, right? But if there's a trend, or if there's just a big discussion about something, so like gender, so then that would be something like, okay, well then if I'm in finance, how might that relate? So if it's almost like a game of picking 2 unrelated topics and merging them, and then you've already found like 2 audiences that would be interested in one thing. So yeah, I mean, in the example in my tweet, which I guess you're gonna share the link to this tweet, but I was just thinking of something random, because this actually came from, so I mentioned I opened a membership at the beginning of 2020. So I had some people in there, and they were asking, okay, where do you start? So this particular person was starting a podcast about the menopause and how that changes, like how women see things and their perspective and their families and their work, and how that affects everything else, which is gold dust, in the sense that it wouldn't just be a menopause or women's health magazine that would be interested in that. It would also be a range of businesses that would probably, business magazines that would be interested in saying, okay, well, women employees how can we help them? How can we not help them? Like, what happens when menopause can affect all these different areas. So I was just trying to think of the most random thing to go with it, like menopause plus lemons. and then instantly I was like, well, yeah. So you could ask, is citrus good? And therefore, does the menopause and diet have a relation? And then you've already got two completely different audiences that would be interested in one thing, right?
That's kind of an amazing thing when you describe it that way. The thread caught my attention right away. It's a terrific thread. It's chock full of great practices. We're going to include a link to it in the show notes, as well as when we send it out on social media, because I think everybody needs to run through this. Even if you think you know what you're doing, you read through this and you pick up a couple of new best practices. So definitely going to include that. And it's a great place to end our conversation here, because I think it strikes the right tone, which is what you seem to bring to all of your work is research. And I think that's really an unappreciated part of what we do as PR people. Lots of people, especially clients, think that, we just write press releases and we send them out to reporters and we leverage our relationships and we get publicity. And that's the end of the game. And really, it has its foundation in research. And this tweet that you did walks through the way you do research. And I think it's just brilliant.
Oh, well, thank you very much. And yeah, what you just said reminds me of, I don't know if you should call them bad, but bad clients. One actually, said to me, if there isn't coverage in newspapers, what are we paying you for? And I that was a bit critical, and I had a bit of soul searching afterwards. But I was thinking, like, there is so much that goes on between no coverage and seeing a story in the paper.
It is so true. It is so true. Probably about a quarter to a third of our time is actually talking with reporters and actually doing the back and forth work that goes into getting a story. The other 2/3 is just the foundational work. Well, this has been a great conversation, Amanda. We're going to segue now into the rapid fire question portion of our podcast. This is where we steal a page from inside the actor's studio, ask our questions, a series of rapid fire questions meant to elicit just a simple 1 or 2 word answer, whatever your gut tells you when you hear it. So with your indulgence, let's begin. Rapid fire question number 1. What is your favorite news source?
See, that's a hard one. I mean, Twitter, definitely, and Google News with different filters. But from there, I'd probably just say my list of people that I've collected, like reporters and what they're working on. Yeah.
All right. Rapid fire question number 2. What is your favorite social media platform?
Well, it may get me off the hook if I say Twitter, and obviously with spaces and lists and all of that, Twitter is amazing. But actually, my when I started out and the biggest growth was actually Facebook groups and memberships that are based on Facebook groups, and then another platform for courses and stuff. So actually, business groups on Facebook.
That's great. Rapid fire question number 3. Coffee or alcohol? And you're in the UK, so we might be subbing in tea here, but go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I do like coffee, but I would say alcohol. Yeah.
Very good. Honest answer. Rapid fire question number 4. What's your favorite on the run food?
Oh, this is a hard one. I mean, donuts with and there's a particular, Greg's is a shop in the UK, and they do like this toffee custard filled donut, and it's amazing. And from when I was a child, that was my favorite. So
Oh, that sounds brilliant. I'm hungry already. Rapid fire question number 5. What do you want to be after you finish this career?
That is a very good question. Well, probably I'll end up having some kind of animal pet sanctuary thing and be surrounded by fluffy, cute animals, and make up stories about them. It's like, journalism in reverse.
There you go. I smell an author career in the offing. There we go. Wonderful. Well, Amanda, this has been a great conversation. Thanks for spending time with us. Please let people know how they can find you online.
Well, my website is pouncepride.com. There will be more added to that. You can find me virtually everywhere at Leek Writes, as in with a pen. And and on TikTok, I'm Leek Pounces, and I've got one particular video full of really bad jokes about bananas. So there's a treat in store.
We will make sure to share that link as well. Well, thanks again, Amanda. Appreciate you spending time with us. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Please remember to subscribe to the show, connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at The PR Podcast, and send us a question or a comment. Our intro is by Christopher Appold. You can find him and his fantastic photography on Instagram at Christopher_APPOLDT. Check him out there and hire him for all your photography needs. You can find me online at Jody Fisher on all the socials and on the web at jodyfisherpr.com. We'll see you next time on the PR Podcast.